Okay, let's unpack this. We are diving deep into a really quite fragile artifact, a partial world map drawn way back in 1513, right at the explosive start of the Age of Exploration. And this document, well, it depends who you ask, doesn't it? It's either this cartographic masterpiece showing the absolute peak of 16th century global intelligence gathering, or it's literal, undeniable proof of lost high-tech stuff, maybe ancient astronauts, even a civilization that vanished thousands of years before the Ice Age ended. So our mission today is, well, it's complex. We're going to try and tell the whole story and all of its aspects. That means really synthesizing everything, but sticking strictly to the sources surrounding this legendary Piri Reis map. We need to look at the verifiable historical facts that make this map genuinely amazing, but also the rigorous arguments cartographers use to debunk those, let's say, sensational claims that have made it such a cultural icon.
Indeed. And the map itself, it's dated AH 919. That lines up exactly with 1513 AD, drawn on gazelle skin vellum, which is incredible in itself. It didn't really become famous internationally until, 1929, when it was rediscovered in the Topkapi Palace archives in Istanbul.
Right, before that, just sitting there.
Pretty much, yeah. An archival curiosity. But since then, wow, it's become one of history's great geographical and, I guess, theoretical mysteries. And the central question, the thing that really fuels all this controversy, is exactly what you hinted at. How could this 16th century Ottoman admiral, Piri Reis, how could he possibly have drawn lands that, well, Europeans supposedly wouldn't officially discover for another 300 years?
Yeah.
We're talking specifically about that southern coastline, the one often claimed by, let's call them fringe theorists, to be a perfectly surveyed ice-free Antarctica.
Yeah, that's the big one.
Right. But before we can even touch those extraordinary claims, we really have to understand the man himself, Piri Reis, and the very careful historical process he actually used to put all his information together.
That context is absolutely crucial. So our roadmap for you, the listener, today is pretty clear, I think. We're going to cover the really remarkable life of Piri Reis. He is a man of war, but also of letters. Then we'll examine in detail the actual sources he used. And this is astonishing, it seems. He had access to maps used by Christopher Columbus himself.
Yeah, that's a key piece.
Then we'll look at the proven, documented accuracy of the map in the world that was known in 1513. And finally, we'll spend a good chunk of time dissecting the rigorous cartographic reasons why mainstream scholarship just decisively rejects those more sensational, extraordinary claims about Antarctica.
Hold on.
Okay, so let's start with the creator. Piri ibn Haji Muhyiddin, we know him as Piri Reis. Born in Gallipoli, Ottoman Empire, around 1470, lived until 1553. And he wasn't some dusty academic in a library.
Not at all.
He was a real powerhouse in the Ottoman Empire, and understanding his career, his life, is just critical to getting why this map was even made.
Absolutely. Piri's life was really defined by this shift, this transition from being a privateer, a corsair, to becoming a state admiral. He started his career learning from his uncle, Kamal Reis.
A famous name in his own right.
Oh, very famous. A feared corsair operating in the Mediterranean. So from about 1478 to 1493, Piri was literally learning the trade on the water, charting coastlines, figuring out currents, and crucially gathering intelligence through conflict, through capture.
Right, so he was plugged into the flow of global information right from the start, basically, from his youth.
Exactly. This wasn't theoretical knowledge. It was hands-on.
And that kind of apprenticeship, that hands-on experience in private maritime service must have paid off massively later on, strategically. The Ottomans, just like the European powers, they knew that information gathered at sea was a vital military asset.
Totally. And, the sophistication of the Ottoman intelligence network at this time is often really underestimated. Piri eventually made that jump into the official state navy. By 1516, 1517, somewhere around there, he'd reached the rank of fleet admiral. I mean, this was a position of serious strategic importance within what was then a rapidly expanding global power.
So he wasn't just drawing maps for, personal interest.
No. He was providing geopolitical tools directly for the Sultan. This was high-level stuff.
And you can see that military application straight away. He played a key role in conquering Alexandria for Sultan Selim Thirst. That shows his skills weren't just navigation. He was a serious military commander, too. And we also know his career kind of culminated later with compiling a really monumental piece of work.
Yes, exactly. His other great literary and cartographic achievement, besides the 1513 map, was the Kitab-ul-Tariya, the Book of Navigation, finished around 1521, and this wasn't some, gentle travel guide. It was a comprehensive 2-volume military manual, a hydrographic chart collection.
Yeah.
Super detailed.
What kind of detail are we talking?
Oh, everything. Coastlines, harbors, safe places to anchor, hidden dangers, detailed sailing directions, even local customs for the Mediterranean and Aegean seas. It was basically the definitive guide for Ottoman sailors and military strategists. And his final years. He was admiral in charge of the really critical Indian Ocean, Red Sea, and Arabian Sea routes, right up until his death in 1553.
Okay, so that context is just vital. The Piri Reis Map we're focusing on wasn't some academic exercise. It was, effectively, a high-level intelligence briefing presented directly to the Sultan. So, to talk about the strategic environment in 1513, the world was suddenly getting much, much bigger, right? And the Ottomans absolutely needed to know what the Spanish and Portuguese were finding out.
Precisely. 1513 is barely 2 decades after Columbus's first voyage. Geographical knowledge was just exploding in Europe. New lands, new routes. And the Ottoman Empire needed to incorporate these discoveries immediately. Why? To protect its own strategic interests, especially things like the spice trade, controlling those vital sea routes. Piri's map was designed specifically to meet that urgent intelligence need.
Right, keeping up with the competition.
And the way he made it, the process itself, it really reinforces this idea that it was an official, very methodical project. Piri himself notes he spent about 3 years compiling the final chart in Gallipoli. And the core task, it was a massive feat of synthesis. Taking every scrap of geographical knowledge he could find, regardless of where it came from. And this is the really tough part, reducing it all to a common scale, common projection. So the Sultan had one single usable world chart.
Wow, that sounds incredibly difficult.
Oh, immensely. Imagine trying to stitch together maps made with different assumptions, different languages, different measurements.
And the political angle is fascinating, too. Presenting this map to Sultan Selimur, it wasn't just like, hey, look what I drew.
Not at all. It was a formal demonstration. Proof of his competence, his access to vital, cutting-edge intelligence from rivals. And yeah, it absolutely gave his naval career a significant boost. So the 1513 map, you have to see it as a reflection of the Ottoman Empire's really sophisticated and frankly aggressive approach to gathering global information during a period of intense geopolitical competition.
Okay, let's unpack this source stack then, because this is where Piri's genius, or at least his skill as a compiler, really shines through. And it helps explain why the map is so complex. He wasn't just copying one perfect map, right?
No, definitely not. He was a master compiler. He was dealing with cartography made in different languages, probably using different projection methods, maybe even different units of measurement. It was messy.
So what did he actually cite? What did he say he used in his own notes on the map?
Okay, so his annotations, they're written right there on the vellum. They're our main clue. He openly cited using about 20 earlier charts for his synthesis. This stack included, famously, 8 ancient charts. He claimed they dated back to Alexander the Great's time. Now, scholars generally think these were likely derived from Ptolemaic geography, the classical Greek stuff, but preserved and maybe enhanced over centuries by Arabic and Persian scholars. That was the kind of classical base layer.
Right, the old knowledge.
Then you had the brand new, cutting-edge stuff, 4 Portuguese charts, these detailed, newly discovered coasts, probably in the Atlantic, maybe down the African coast, and an Indian map of Hind showing he had access to Eastern cartographic traditions too.
Just blending those alone, classical, Arabic, Eastern European, that's pretty unprecedented for the time. But there's one source that's absolutely crucial, isn't there? The one that explains the map's early and really detailed accuracy in the New World.
Ah, yes, the crucial one, the famous source. A map either drawn or used by Christopher Columbus himself.
Wow.
And the map's own legend, the writing on the map, actually tells this incredible story detailing how Piri got hold of it.
Okay, tell us the story.
The anecdote goes like this. Piri's uncle, the corsair Piri Reis, captured a Spanish ship near Valencia back in 1501. On board was a Spanish sailor, maybe enslaved, maybe just captured, who claimed he'd sailed on 3 of Columbus's voyages.
3 voyages?
That's the claim. And this sailor supposedly had one of Columbus's own working charts of the New World. Piri later inherited this chart from his uncle and used it in his 1513 map.
Okay, hold on. If that legend is true, even partly true, it means Piri Reis was using a copy of Christopher Columbus's primary working map of the New World within just 21 years of Columbus's first voyage, and maybe only 6 years after Columbus's last voyage.
Yeah.
That is just astounding. It speaks volumes about the speed of 16th century intelligence gathering, a major trade secret essentially lost in a naval capture, and almost instantly absorbed and used by a rival global power.
Exactly that. So the map becomes this massive synthesis of the historical record. It blends the best available, most up-to-date intelligence from multiple global powers, Spanish, Portuguese, maybe others compiled by an Ottoman admiral, specifically for state strategy. And the sheer intellectual effort involved in just harmonizing these sources that probably use completely different starting points for longitude, different projection methods, different names for the same places. You just can't overstate how challenging that must have been.
Right. So now let's shift from the high stakes history of how the map was made to the actual physical object itself. What survives today, it's only about 1/3 maybe of the original world map.
Yeah, it's a fragment.
An irregular fragment, yeah. But it's still one of the most priceless artifacts they have at the Topkapi Palace Museum in Istanbul.
Let's focus on the material reality for a second. It's drawn on a single piece of really fine, highly prepared gazelle hide vellum. That's a durable material, but it's also delicate now after 500 years. And it's richly colored with all these annotations written in Ottoman Turkish. But to really understand its accuracy and why it led to all these later controversies, we absolutely have to grasp its cartographic style.
Okay.
Crucially, this map is a portal land nautical chart. It's really essential to understand what that means. This style was optimized for navigation, but mostly in the relatively confined space of the Mediterranean Sea and the nearby coasts. It uses these things called rum lines, straight lines radiating out from central compass roses. They were designed to show direct sailing directions between points, like sail southeast from here to get there.
Okay, so why is identifying it specifically as a portal land chart so important for our deep dive here?
Because portal land charts basically assume a locally flat Earth. They don't have a true, sophisticated latitude and longitude grid like the maps we're used to seeing, like Mercator projections. So while they can offer superb accuracy over shorter distances within their known area, they inherently suffer from distortion. It's called planimetric error, when you try to depict vast, newly discovered continental coastlines that are far away from the chart's central projection point. And that distortion, that inherent technical limitation, is the core reason why the map later became the focus of all the sensational claims. It looked wrong in certain places to modernize expecting perfect projection. Right, okay, so let's get into the actual geography now. This is where it gets really fascinating. If we look at the surviving fragment, what specific coastlines can we actually see and how accurate are they for 1513?
Okay, we can trace it. Starting on the eastern edge of the fragment, that shows the western edge of the known world as Piri understood it in 1513. So you've got the Iberian Peninsula, Spain, and Portugal, and the coast of West Africa. And we can actually identify Ottoman place names, toponyms, that Piri added himself. This shows him actively integrating this knowledge. For instance, he names areas like Akbun, that corresponds to Cape Branco, and Yeşilbrun for Cape Verde. So he's renaming them, essentially claiming them intellectually for the Ottoman world.
Exactly. It shows this instant integration of global geography into the Ottoman strategic view.
And then as we move west across the Atlantic, what about the islands?
The map shows the Azores, the Canary Islands, and the Cape Verde Islands. And they are rendered with, honestly, really impressive accuracy, given the basic tools they had back in 1513. The precision there in the Atlantic really speaks to the quality of those Portuguese charts he must have used.
Right. But the real star of the show, the part that really validates that Columbus source story, is the New World depiction, right?
Absolutely. The left side of the fragment clearly shows this continuous coastline. And it's undeniably the eastern coast of South America. Specifically, that northern shoulder part that includes modern-day Brazil, Venezuela, and the Caribbean islands.
And the names.
The internal naming, the labels on the map, they correspond exactly to Columbus's own descriptions and names. This is what really confirms Piri's claim about accessing that crucial Spanish source. For example, Piri's map labels the island we now call Puerto Rico as Isla de San Juan Bautista. That was Columbus's original name for it. And the whole Caribbean region is kind of collectively labeled the shore of Antillia.
Wow.
Getting that level of detail, that specific nomenclature, correct just 21 years after Columbus's first voyage. It proves Piri was working with genuine, state-of-the-art Spanish intelligence captured somehow.
So the map itself is like this physical, cartographic proof of just how incredibly fast geographical knowledge was moving between competing empires in the early 16th century. It's amazing. UNESCO's assessment seems to back this up, focusing on the historical significance.
It does, yeah. UNESCO observed that the Piri Reis chart is the earliest known cartographic record we have of Columbus's voyages, and they specifically noted that it displays these coastlines with a detailed and considerably accurate depiction. But we have to keep stressing that qualifier for its time. The planimetric precision, how accurate the shapes of the newly found lands are, is impressive for 1513.
But let's not just gloss over the technical difficulty there. You mentioned before that determining accurate position, especially east-west, was almost impossible then. Why was that?
It all comes down to the longitude problem. Latitude, figuring out how far north or south you are, that was relatively straightforward. You could use a marine astrolabe to measure the height of the sun at noon or the pole star at night. Sailors were pretty good at that. But longitude, knowing your exact east-west position, that was incredibly difficult. It requires knowing the precise time difference between where you are currently and a known fixed point, like your home port or the prime meridian. And in 1513, there were simply no accurate chronometers, no portable, reliable clocks that could keep accurate time on a rocking ship for months on end. It just wasn't possible.
So how did they estimate it?
Educated guesswork, mostly. Dead reckoning, calculating position based on course steered and distance sailed. Maybe some complex lunar observations, trying to use the moon's position relative to stars. But it all led to significant errors in placing newly discovered lands east and west on a map. And this technical limitation meant that any map made back then, even Piri's brilliant synthesis, was guaranteed to contain positional errors. Errors that, much later, people with other agendas could seize upon.
Right, okay, so that's the amazing, verifiable part of the map. Now let's pivot to the element that really lit the fuse for the controversy. The geographical setup for all the fantastical theories. The map doesn't just stop neatly at South America, does it? It shows this huge southern landmass stretching down and then across the bottom edge of the fragment.
That southern landmass, yeah. That's the critical point where things get speculative. Even on Piri's original map, it clearly reflects that classical theoretical belief. It was pervasive since the time of Ptolemy in an antipodal land, Terra Australis Incognita.
The unknown southern land.
Exactly. This idea that there had to be a massive southern continent to sort of balance out the land masses in the northern hemisphere.
Yeah.
Piri, because he was compiling both ancient sources like Ptolemy and new sources like the Portuguese charts, included it. He put everything he had on there.
And his annotations, the notes he wrote on this southern region, they're a perfect example of his synthesis process, aren't they? A mix of fact, speculation, maybe even legend.
Precisely. His notes there show this blend. He's got travelers' tales mixed with maybe some genuine geographical knowledge filtering through. He notes, for example, that these southern regions have very cold climates. Okay, that's accurate for southern latitudes. But then the notes also reflect legends, claims that the region is thought to contain large snakes. And there are drawings of exotic animals, things that look a bit like penguins, maybe.
So he wasn't claiming to have surveyed this himself.
No, not at all. He was quite honest about it, labeling it as land he was reporting from theoretical or ancient sources, or maybe just rumors from sailors. He included everything available to him to provide the most comprehensive, even if partly speculative, worldview for the Sultan.
Okay, so this transition, right, from the documented accuracy up north in the Atlantic and Caribbean to this purely speculative landmass down south. That's what allowed the map to just explode into public consciousness in the mid-20th century. The historical document suddenly became evidence of something much, much bigger. So why did this map become so famous and controversial, specifically regarding that huge southern landmass?
Well, it was like the perfect historical Rorschach test, wasn't it? People saw what they wanted to see. The key claim, the one that really grabbed the public's imagination, was this assertion that the southern landmass Piri's speculative Terra Australis was actually a completely accurate, perfectly surveyed map of an ice-free Antarctica, mapped long, long before Europeans officially sighted Antarctica in 1820.
And this idea really found its main proponent in Charles H. Hapgood back in the 1960s. He wasn't a cartographer by trade, was he? More a history of science professor.
That's right. Hapgood's analysis, especially in his 1966 book, Maps of the Ancient Sea Kings, really provided the kind of intellectual framework for that whole fringe movement surrounding the map. He claimed that if you took the map fragment and applied certain geometric adjustments, the coastline depicted there perfectly matched the contour of Queen Maud Land in Antarctica. But he went further. He claimed the map even showed specific geographical features like valleys, maybe riverbeds, even mountains that were supposedly hidden beneath the massive Antarctic ice sheet today. Features that, Hapgood argued, were only confirmed by modern seismic surveys decades later.
Right. So if that were true, it would imply knowledge of the Antarctic coastline back when it wasn't covered in ice. What kind of timeline did Hapgood suggest for the original source map that Piri supposedly copied?
Hapgood argued that the source map Piri used must have been incredibly ancient, drawn maybe somewhere between 4,000 and 15,000 years ago. That's the period when some geological evidence suggests parts of the Antarctic coast might have been ice-free. And he connected this to his own rather controversial theory of rapid Earth crust displacement, basically, sudden pole shifts. He argued that only a massive catastrophic geographical upheaval could explain how this impossible ancient knowledge survived and ended up on Piri's source map.
So the implication was this knowledge came from some vanished, highly advanced ancient civilization.
That was the core idea, yes. Impossible ancient knowledge.
And then, as often happens with these historical anomalies, the idea got picked up and amplified by, let's say, the heavy hitters of ancient mysteries and speculation.
Exactly. Enter Erich von Däniken, author of the hugely popular Chariots of the Gods. In 1968, he took Hapgood's basic premise and just ran with it.
How so?
Von Däniken basically argued that the map's supposedly impossible level of detail pointed towards ancient astronaut contact. His hypothesis was, roughly, that only high-tech surveys, like from aircraft or even satellites, could have produced such a detailed, accurate, ice-free map of Antarctica way back then. And this information, he speculated, must have been passed down by extraterrestrials, or maybe some super-advanced lost civilization like the Atlanteans. And then somehow, through this astonishingly long and unlikely chain of transmission, that knowledge eventually trickled down to Piri Reis in Gallipoli in 1513.
Right, it's quite a leap. And we also saw other fringe authors jumping in, like Alan Eckert with his HAB theory, linking the map to global catastrophes, pole shifts, maybe even explaining mammoth fossils.
Yeah, the map became this kind of nexus point, a piece of evidence used to support many different kinds of pseudoscientific or alternative history ideas. Global floods, magnetic pole reversals, sudden melting of ice sheets. But the core idea, the one that really sticks across all these theories, is that the Piri Reis Map isn't just a 16th century document. It's somehow a remnant, a copy of a primordial world map from before the flood or before the last ice age.
It does raise an important question, though. Why do these theories persist so strongly? Decades after the initial excitement, and frankly the subsequent debunking from mainstream cartographers, why the enduring appeal?
Well, I think they persist because they offer a really seductive, almost romantic answer to what looks like a genuine historical puzzle. The actual historical truth that Piri Reis was a brilliant, incredibly painstaking compiler working with incomplete and sometimes flawed sources is, let's face it, less dramatic.
Less exciting than Ancient Aliens, yeah.
It's less exciting than the idea that a 16th century admiral somehow possessed secret high-tech surveys from a lost civilization. It taps into that fundamental human desire for hidden histories, for global secrets, for proof that our past was way more complex and it may be technologically advanced than conventional history admits. Yeah. It's kind of an intellectual escape hatch, away from the sometimes messy, incomplete reality of documented history.
That's a good way to put it. And it's vital we acknowledge that cultural phenomena on the map really is a source of inspiration for sensational stories. But now, okay, we have to pivot to the more rigorous side of this deep dive, how actual cartographic analysis deals with these extraordinary claims. Okay, let's really look at the evidence that historians and professional cartographers use to, well, rigorously reject these dramatic, really popular claims about Antarctica. The consensus view, the mainstream scholarly view, is that the map is highly impressive for its time, yes, but it's entirely explainable by a combination of known 16th century knowledge and, crucially, known 16th century errors in map projection.
Right. And the most fundamental argument against the whole Antarctica claim, it rests on the simple issue of coastal continuity. How the coastlines are drawn on the map fragment itself. If you actually examine the surviving fragment carefully, that controversial southern section, the supposed Antarctic bit, it doesn't just float free as a separate continent like Antarctica actually does. No, it joins smoothly onto the southernmost point of the South American coastline depicted on the map, and then it swings sharply to the east.
Okay, so it's drawn as physically connected to South America.
Exactly. And that specific cartographic choice, that continuity, is crucial. That configuration only really makes sense if the cartographer, Piri Reis, was interpreting his various sources as showing an extended, maybe speculative or perhaps just incorrectly mapped tip of South America. In essence, he seems to have physically attached the theoretical Terra Australis legend directly onto the end of the known Brazilian coast he had from his Portuguese sources.
And if it really were an accurate survey of Antarctica, that land bridge, that continuity with the South American continent, would be geographically impossible. It fundamentally misrepresents where Antarctica actually is on the globe relative to South America.
Precisely. Antarctica is separate. There's the Drake Passage. Furthermore, the historian Paul Lunde, who studied the map extensively, highlighted a really critical flaw in Charles Hapgood's attempt to align that southern coast with Queen Maud Land in Antarctica. Lunde pointed out that to make the southern coast look like Antarctica, Hapgood's model required arbitrarily ignoring key geographical features that would have been hugely important and possibly even known or suspected around Peary's time.
What specifically did Hapgood's theory need cartographers to just ignore or omit?
Okay, Hapgood's reconstruction essentially requires the cartographer, whether it was Peary or his supposed ancient source, to completely omit the Strait of Magellan and Cape Horn. Now think about the implications of that for a minute. In 1513, European explorers were desperately searching for a sea passage around or through that massive, blocking South American continent to get to the Spice Islands in the east. Magellan wouldn't actually find his strait until 1520, a few years after Peary made his map. But if Peary or his source had access to a map that truly and accurately detailed the southern end of the continent, it would almost certainly have shown that gap, the separation between the mainland and any potential southern continent, Terra Australis.
Right, the passage.
Yes. Peary, as an experienced admiral and navigator himself, would surely not have willfully ignored such a major strategic feature, a strait, a passage, a body of water separating the landmasses, if he had a truly accurate survey showing the continent's end. The fact he drew it as continuous strongly suggests he was mapping what he believed to be one continuous landmass, basically, a vastly exaggerated South America curving east.
Okay, so we have the connection point to South America and the missing Strait of Magellan as two major pieces of cartographic evidence against the Antarctica theory. But what's considered the most definitive proof? The thing that really shows the landmass is just distorted South America, warped by the limits of 16th century mapping tech.
Well, what's really fascinating here is something called a rotation test.
Hmm.
This is kind of the pivotal moment in the cartographic debunking. Remember our earlier discussion about the inherent distortion in portal-in charts?
Yeah, designed for short distances, assuming a flat plane.
Exactly. They work well locally, but when you try to project vast, curved continental coastlines onto that flat sheet of vellum, distortion is inevitable, especially way out at the edges of the known world. So cartographers realize something interesting. If you treat that controversial southern section of Peary's chart not as an accurate depiction, but as if it were drawn with a significant projection error, specifically if you mentally rotate that coastline about 90 degrees.
Rotate.
Yeah, rotate it counterclockwise.
Yeah.
So instead of running mostly east-west along the bottom of the map, it runs more north-south. If you do that, correcting for the kind of scale pressure created by forcing the huge new world onto this flat portolan framework, the outlines suddenly match the known east coast of Brazil much better than they match any polar region.
Wait, walk me through that again. Why would the coast of Brazil suddenly swing 90 degrees and end up running east-west at the bottom? That sounds weird.
It does sound weird, but it makes sense if you think about the compilation process. Peary was trying to synthesize sources that likely used different projection methods. He probably had, say, a Portuguese planisphere, maybe a flat circular chart that showed the coast of Brazil curving gently southwards. But then he had to graph that information onto his own flat, essentially rectangular portolan vellum, which probably assumed a completely different center point and didn't have a proper grid. To make this newly discovered coast fit alongside his known African and Iberian coasts, and to satisfy that ancient theoretical requirement for a terra australis filling the southern void, he likely had to compress and stretch the coastline.
Like trying to wrap a flat piece of paper around a ball, it wrinkles and distorts.
Precisely. It's an artifact of forcing curved spherical geography onto a flat, non-gridded map using portolan techniques not designed for that scale. So he took the long, mostly north-south coastline of Brazil, and due to the projection distortion needed to make it fit, it ended up swinging sharply eastward and getting stretched out along the bottom. The result isn't the coastline of an ice-free Antarctica. It's the eastern coast of South America, just geometrically stretched and misplaced due to the limitations of the mapping technology he was using.
Wow. Okay, that is a stunning piece of cartographic detective work. It suggests the map's supposed impossibility is actually just evidence of Peary grappling with a really difficult technical problem using the imperfect tools he had. Let's quickly address those specific claims that make the fringe theories sound so convincing, though. Like the idea it shows mountains under the Antarctic ice that match modern sonar.
Right, the sub-ice mountains claim. That's often cited, but it's misleading when you look closely. The features on Peary's map that are claimed to be Antarctic mountains or inland topography, they actually turn out, on closer inspection, to be clusters of islands shown off the coast, not inland features. Again, Piri was combining sources. He was likely accurately mapping some existing island groups that he or his Portuguese-Spanish sources did know about in the South Atlantic, perhaps like South Georgia, or maybe the Falklands, and then he mistakenly incorporated them into the speculative continental outline of his Terra Australis. They are placed roughly where islands are, not where deep sub-ice mountains would be found inland on Antarctica.
Okay. And once again, the timeline just seems like the ultimate unavoidable problem for the Hapgood-style claims, doesn't it?
It really remains the final absolute nail in the coffin for the ancient supercivilization or ice-free Antarctica theories. Antarctica was first sighted by Europeans in 1820. Documented fact. The claim that Piri Reis, in 1513, had access to a secret ancient source map showing an ice-free continent is completely unnecessary to explain what's actually on the map. All the information depicted is entirely plausibly derived from the known Columbus and Portuguese voyages that had occurred by then, combined with the prevailing European and Ottoman cartographic theories of the day about Terra Australis. Piri synthesized this state-of-the-art early 16th century knowledge just 21 years after Columbus first reached the Americas. No wild leaps are needed, no ancient aliens, no lost civilizations knowledge is required to explain this document. The real challenge for cartographers isn't explaining the map's accuracy in the known parts, it's explaining the error in the unknown parts, caused by trying to project a sphere onto a flat map in 1513.
So what is the final sort of definitive scholarly conclusion about the map's accuracy and its origins? Sum it up for us.
Okay, the Piri Reis Map is not some secret artifact from a pre-Ice Age exploration. It is, however, a brilliant, though flawed document of real 16th century geography. It showcases incredible intelligence gathering and sophisticated Ottoman cartography for its time. It's incredibly impressive because of its detailed accuracy in the Caribbean and along the Brazilian coast, based clearly on those captured Columbus Spanish and Portuguese sources. But its southern regions reflect the contemporary blend of 1. Classical geographical theory, the need for a terra australis, and 2. The inevitable rejection errors that happen when trying to plot a newly discovered curved world onto a flat sheet of vellum using port-align methods. It is fundamentally a product of brilliant compilation from known, albeit imperfect, contemporary sources, created by someone working at the absolute cutting edge and hitting the limits of 16th century mapping technology.
Okay, shifting focus back now to its undeniable historical significance. Setting aside the fringe stuff, the Piri Reis Map is just this phenomenal example of cultural exchange happening at a truly global turning point. The sheer speed with which these sources, Spanish, Portuguese, maybe others, crossed linguistic, cultural, and even military boundaries is perhaps its most astonishing true story.
Absolutely. I think the map represents a perfect synthesis, a snapshot of how different, often fiercely competing cultures were processing this sudden flood of new geographical information right at the dawn of the Age of Exploration. Think about it. On one single sheet of gazelle hide, you see Ottoman administrative needs driving the project. You see echoes of Arabic cartographic traditions. You see cutting-edge Portuguese exploration charts and Spanish discoveries filtered through Columbus all blended together. It really shows the deep interconnectedness of global knowledge, even back in the early 16th century, despite all the constant warfare and intense rivalry between these powers. Information still flowed.
We mentioned it's housed at the Topkapi Palace. Can you tell us a bit more about the current status of the map, its preservation? Given its immense value and the fragility of the vellum, it must be under extremely strict environmental controls.
Oh, absolutely. That surviving fragment is kept very safely in the archives of the Topkapi Palace Museum in Istanbul. Its historical importance was formally recognized by UNESCO, which inscribed it in its Memory of the World program back in 2017. They designated it as a document of profound global significance. And that formal recognition really highlights its value not just to Turkey, but to world history, because it documents those very first European attempts to chart the New World seen through an Ottoman lens.
What are the specific challenges, though, in preserving a large, detailed chart drawn on, essentially, animal skin? Gazelle hide vellum sounds delicate.
It is. The material itself, being organic, is inherently fragile after 5 centuries. It's very susceptible to changes in temperature and humidity. Those fluctuations can cause the parchment to contract or tear or warp. Plus, conservators always worry about the inks fading and just the general aging process. So because of this fragility, the original map is almost never put on public display anymore.
Makes sense. Too risky.
Exactly. It's kept in highly specialized archives. Strict climate control, limiting light exposure, maintaining very specific humidity and temperature levels, all to ensure it survives for future generations to study. Fortunately, though, to support scholarly research and, public access, without actually risking the artifact, High-resolution digital images are widely available now. So anyone can study every annotation, every rum line, every little detail Piri added online.
Okay, let's try and pull all these threads together now and really connect them back to you, the listener. Piri Reis, back in 1513, was doing almost exactly what any modern researcher or maybe an intelligence analyst does today, right? He was trying to distill diverse, often conflicting sources of information into one single, cohesive, usable package. He was dealing with a massive information overload problem, 16th century style.
That really is the core lesson of the Piri Reis Map that goes beyond just cartography, I think. His work shows the immense value, but also the immense difficulty of synthesis. He had to make choices. Which sources should he trust more? The classical, theoretical, Ptolemaic sources that insisted on a huge terra australis, or the brand new, highly accurate, but geographically limited Portuguese coastal surveys?
It's a balancing act.
Totally. He was acting as an editor, maybe a data manager, definitely an intelligence officer. He created a document that was essentially a snapshot of world knowledge as it existed in 1513. That included the verified facts, the cutting-edge new discoveries, and the established yet ultimately mistaken theories of the time, like terra australis. The map's true wonder, its real historical significance, lies not in the fictional mysteries that got layered onto it centuries later, but in the sheer efficiency and intellectual ambition of the 16th century Ottoman state to go out and gather the most current, comprehensive global knowledge available anywhere at that moment.
That's a really profound realization, actually. We often tend to romanticize historical discoveries as these single, isolated acts of individual genius. But Piri Reis, his map, it really shows us that the real historical genius is often the ability to manage complexity, to harmonize conflicting data sets, to turn raw intelligence into strategic knowledge for decision makers.
Precisely. And his dedication to that synthesis, even when the data clearly conflicted, led to both the map's verifiable accuracy in some areas and its most famous error, that conflation of South America's tip with the theoretical southern continent. And that in itself is a lesson in data management that's still relevant today, isn't it? A good compiler, a good synthesizer, will often include all the relevant sources, even if some of those sources later turn out to be based on historical theory or speculation rather than fully documented reality. You put it all out there.
So we've navigated the truly remarkable life and career of Piri Reis. We've examined the impressive, verifiable accuracy of his 1513 Portolan chart, especially regarding the Atlantic and the New World coasts. And we've carefully dissected why those enduring, sensational claims about lost ancient knowledge about Antarctica ultimately fail when you subject them to rigorous, conventional cartographic analysis. It remains a map that is genuinely a synthesis of world knowledge at an absolutely pivotal moment in human history.
Yeah. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the Piri Reis Map really stands as this powerful testament, not to ancient aliens or shifting poles or anything like that, but to the speed, the complexity, and the sheer intellectual ambition of 16th century intelligence gathering. Its greatest lesson, perhaps, is that sometimes the most astonishing fact of all is the documented historical truth. The truth of human ingenuity, organizational capability, and the relentless drive to know the world rather than the elaborate fiction we might sometimes prefer. What really stands out to you, thinking about it now, Piri's skill, his challenge in handling so many conflicting sources, those ancient charts, the brand new Portuguese surveys, that incredibly secret Columbus map, and somehow integrating them all, successfully or not, onto one single piece of vellum. It's a challenge, as you said, that modern data scientists, intelligence analysts grapple with every single day when they're dealing with disparate global information streams. How do you make sense of it all?
Indeed. It really leaves us thinking about the difference between truly impressive, documented human achievement like Piri Reis's incredible synthesis and perhaps our collective desire for some impossibly perfect, error-free artifact from the past that proves our wildest theories. The reality is often more complex and maybe even more interesting. This deep dive is concluded.